All right. Today is chapter 12, and from our books, and we are in the questions from the risen Christ. Today is almost really the last class of real teaching. Next week we will take all the questions, we'll give out a handout, and it will grab the picture of all of the questions that we've talked about, as well as all the others, the 307 questions, and we're going to spend time just listening to them. So a lot of the time, if you think about the early church, what they did is they heard the word. They didn't do a lot of commentary probably, or maybe they did it after the fact, but they listened to the word. So really next week will be a time of listening and hearing Jesus speak to you through those questions. We may at the end have a few questions of our own. The book has some questions after the last chapter, but the last chapter is really just that, those questions. So today we wanted to throw up there all the questions that we've had so far. We started out with the inviting of who are you looking for? What are you looking for, or who are you looking for? The next week was compassion. Do you see this woman? The next one was identity. What is your name? Faith and doubt. Where is your faith? Worry. Why do you worry? Reach of love. What is written in the law? How do you read it? That was the Good Samaritan right after that. The healing. What do you want me to do for you? Or do you want to be healed? Abundance. How many loaves do you have? And then who is Jesus? Who do people say I am? And who do you say I am? And from the cross last week, my God, why have you forsaken me? Which just gets us right into this week's class, which is the questions from the risen Christ. And so, the risen Christ, as you think about him, you think that Jesus just came back from the grave, and you'd think he should be just speaking, saying, look at me, I'm alive again, all these important things of Jesus. And you know what the first thing he says is, whenever the first person sees him? Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for? Going back to our very first week. So, one of the questions Jesus asked 3 times, who are you looking for? And so it's a very interesting question right as the first person sees him, because generally you would think that that's not what he's going to start off with, the question. Now that he's triumphed over the grave, he's still asking questions. And the strange thing is that we have very little information about his resurrection time. I mean, we have like 7 or 8 scenes really, is really all. But in all 7 or 8 scenes, he's still just asking questions. There's very limited information that he gives out during that we know of. It's strange because we do see in Acts and other places that he is around more, but the pictures that we are given from the Gospels are really just questions. So this morning what we're going to do is we're going to look at 3 of those. Since we've looked at this one already, we're just going to jump over it. But we know it's this invitation of really looking into your heart to see who you're looking for. But we're going to start out in Luke 24, 13 through 17. It says this, now that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? So, next question. So this is later that day. What are you discussing together as you walk along? Later in Luke, it's later in Luke 24, 36 through 43, while they were still talking about this, so talking about what had just happened there on Emmaus, the road to Emmaus, those disciples came and met the others, And Jesus shows up and he says, "Peace be with you." They were startled and frightened, thinking about they had saw a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you troubled? Why do doubts rise in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while they still did not believe it because of joy and amazement, he asked them, "Do you have anything to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish. He took it and ate it in their presence. So yet again, starts out with this trouble, so we're going to skip over those, but because that goes back to our picture of faith, that question that we have run through. Do you have anything here to eat? Is our question for today. And then once again in the Gospel of John, a similar situation, but very different. It says, early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but his disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. So they're out fishing. They're out in a boat, actually, at this point. And he called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your nets on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." When they did, they were unable to haul in the nets in because of the large number of fish. So we see here with this one, it actually goes on, and the next thing is this, that John realizes it's Jesus. He tells Peter. Peter jumps in the water, swims back to shore. And so it's interesting in the Jesus is the Question book. He says, this is the one question you never ask a fisherman. Do you have any fish? Because most likely you know the answer is no, and you're just making fun of them. And so this is what Jesus asked of them at this point. And so then the last one we're going to throw out there is this one. When they had finished eating, so this is a bit later in the same exact story. So they all get into the thing, they eat from the fish that Jesus has, actually not from their fish that they just caught. He asked this. It says to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him a third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." So our 4 questions for today culminates in this big picture of who Jesus is and what he's doing. And so the first one, as you have the road to Emmaus, you have these guys, they're walking, they're sad, they're just chit-chatting as they're walking away from Jerusalem after all the things are going on. Jesus shows up, and really is that question that we had at the beginning, this invitation. So what's going on? What are you looking for? And in the end, after they've eaten together, they realize it's Jesus that's there. But they're just having this discussion about how sad things are. Their Savior has died. And not realizing that there was a promise that he had given multiple times. The assumption that historians have is that this is probably there's 2 of the 12. So it's people that had been with him for 3 years, the closest of his followers. And they didn't get it. The same way that the others didn't, as they come back, when we get to the next thing, and they show up and Jesus shows up in the room, and they're just surprised, and they don't believe that it's really him. They think it's a ghost. And so he's like, "Look at my hands, touch me, feel flesh and bone." And they're like, "We're still too shocked that you're standing there." And he's like, "Okay, give me some food." So the important thing about that food situation that you see Jesus eating multiple times is this ghost situation. The Jews believe ghosts exist, but they believe that ghosts cannot eat. Because you know, if a ghost eats, have you ever seen Casper the Friendly Ghost? He eats, it falls right to the ground, and you know it's a ghost. But the same thing with the Jews. It's very traditional that if the Jews have a ghost in front of them, if they eat, they know it's not really a ghost. So it's not even feeling it. So that's not even going to help them. It's that eating. So Jesus is like, fine, give me some food. And he pushes it into that picture of, do you have anything here to eat? Almost a similar question to the feeding of the 5,000. Do you have any bread? Do you have any loaves? That abundance picture. But this is for a different purpose. It's to show that it's not faith anymore. It's reality. Jesus has come back to life. Friends, have you any fish? It's getting back to some of those earlier conversations. That is their lack of just doing what they need to be doing almost. And so we see here that he tells them, hey, cast out to the other side. And because they're just not focusing on what's right there in front of them. And so they find all these fish, come ashore, and then Peter gets the awakening that he needed, that he was missing. And he's asked 3 times a question about love. And Trevor, was this, or Caitlin, was this your communion thought? Somebody had a communion thought on it a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it was Acts, the Acts folks.
Oh yes, it was, yeah. So the Acts folks had the communion thought about this. And so this is, so the funny thing is I had just read the chapter like the week before. And he makes the same exact point about this love thing. So I always thought it was different. So I knew it was the mix of the Greek words. And so the first time, so you have Jesus asking with the word agape. So my thought was always that the last one was Jesus asking with the agape. But this is actually, Jesus asked the first 2 questions with the word agape. The word agape is unconditional love. It's the love that God has for us that is lasting forever, almost like a parent for a child. Even if the bad child goes on and you still love them and willing to do whatever you have, the sacrificial love that we see with Jesus. So Jesus asked Peter this twice with the word agape. Peter's response, yes, I love you. But in English it says love both times. In Greek it says agape for Jesus. Peter responds with philo, which is brotherly love. So like Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. So he responds with this different category of love back to Jesus, saying, yeah, I love you just like my brother. But that's not what Jesus asked. He does it again, the same response back to Peter, or from Peter, I love you like a brother. Jesus is like, okay, fine. Do you love me like a brother? The third time. And Peter is at that point, because Peter had just answered that twice exactly the way Jesus asked, and he's like, now you're coming down to where I'm at. And so Jesus is like, I'm coming down to your level. Do you really love me that way? Because if you think about what Peter had just done 3 times, he denied he even knew anybody that was Jesus. He cursed in the 3rd time as well, saying some cursed word, I guess. It's not recorded in Greek what the word was. It just says he cursed back at the guy, that I don't know you. And so Jesus comes down to his level and says, do you really love me like a brother? And Peter is hurt by that. And so it's a powerful picture that, so both of our writers put it this way, that it's not only Peter he's talking to. This is to us. This is why they're recording it for us. Is that question, do you love me more than these? And so it's a very powerful picture that we need to not forget of how we stand in this. Because all of these questions can be turned to us as we are looking, so from the beginning of our class to the end, So what are we discussing as we walk along? Are we focusing on the resurrection? Are we focusing on who Jesus is, what he's doing for us? Or are we focused on Jesus died? So this is where I struggle with communion thought of tradition, the tradition of almost a sad ceremony. Because really, that's what they were doing at this point. They were sad walking away. He's just like, no, hey, I'm here. Oh, don't forget. There's celebration after the morning. Not the morning in the beginning of the day, but the morning of his death. Do you have anything here to eat? As we turn that to us, as we sit in the room with the pantry stuff, it's sort of nice to have that, but it's talking to each and every one of us. Are we helping others? Are we putting our lives out there for other people to help them? Whether it be the food pantry, whether it be CFS, or if it's just people that we have contact with day in and day out. Friends, have you any fish? So this is a very interesting thing because are you prepared? Are you ready to help when you need to help? So the funniest piece of that is that they show up and he's like, hey, bring some of your fish. And they get there and there's fish already cooked for them to eat and bread. And so Jesus is already taking care of everything before they even got there. But he's like, bring your part. Don't come empty-handed to a meal. Be partakers of it. And then the last one, do we love him more than everything else? And so this goes back to that. I can't remember what it is. There's a thing that Jesus, God first, others second, myself. There's three.
I am third.
There's like one of those remembering things.
There's others then.
It's like,
Oh, the irony.
It's
J-O-Y.
it's joy.
is it joy?
Jesus, others, yourself.
Jesus, others, yourself. You say, the irony of remembering these things. I remember what the three are. So. But so that's really where like putting that priority first, keeping Jesus in front of everything else, whether it be that brotherly love or the agape, Jesus is willing to accept it. And so, because they grow. So just like the fruit of the spirits, that love is one of those main ones. So these are the four questions that we really leave you with as we finish. But we have some fun questions for you to look at, and then at the end we try to grasp the whole picture of all of the questions together. So does it seem strange that a profound question about love follows a straightforward question about food? How does the second question help interpret the first question?
Well, food and a meal was very important to them, and that was where they showed their sign of friendship and their love for each other, which, you know, Jesus, when at the Last Supper, he ate with Judas Iscariot, still handing him his hand of fellowship. But I do want to comment on those other questions that, you know, it also points out sometimes how it's a process to unlearn or to change our preconceived ideas. And Jesus offered them all of these at the end here. It's things to connect the dots so that they have this aha moment. You know, walking along, and then he appears to them. And then when they're in the boat, I mean, at the very beginning when Jesus is calling them, they had come back from fishing and didn't have fish. He says, go out and cast your net. And I think that's why Peter immediately, oh my gosh, it's him. So it's really profound. I just appreciate that.
So one quick comment about this fishing boat thing. So just think about it. I mean, this is like 3 days later. They're already to the point where it's like, I'm just giving up. I'm going back to where I should be at, in a boat. And so it's like really strange, unless they fished all throughout the time with Jesus. But it's just like they go from Jesus dies and it's like, well, guess we have to go back to the boat. Dad, can we take the boat out for a spin? It's like really strange, just the quick transition. Alex?
The first question is about food, and then what came to my mind, sounds a little irreverent, but the way to a man's heart is through his stomach.
I would say probably the question wasn't about food then. So if they had gone back to fishing because they were uncertain about what they were supposed to be doing, I think he was reminding them that that's not the harvest he prepared for them. He's like, you need to pivot. So even though they catch a lot of fish, it's really more about, the harvest being plentiful, but the workers being few, and kind of training them to think about a different type of fishing, as you will, like as he talked about to them throughout his ministry.
Suzanne?
The progression of the story is reminding me of when Jesus wraps the cloth around himself and washes their feet. And then after doing that for them, turns and asks them, now will you do this for others? Will you become a servant? So here he's saying, haven't you any fish? Preparing and eating this meal of fish with them. And then turning and saying to Peter, do you love me? Okay, now feed my lambs.
So I think of two other passages when I think of this, and that is Matthew 25, I think, where Jesus lists the things that, if I was hungry and you fed me, I was naked and you clothed me, I was in prison and you visited me. And then I think also of the Good Samaritan, which is just helping the person who's in front of you. So to me, this is like this could be a banner for food pantries, where it's just, if you love me and you've got food, then show me with your food.
So the next question is a bit going backwards maybe a little bit, but why does Jesus ask Peter if he loves him more than any of the others do? What would you say to Jesus if he asked you this question, or asked this to you? So not necessarily asking you 3 times is not the important thing here, but why more than the others?
He asks, do you love me more than these? And it's not clear to me whether he's saying, do you love me more than you love these other guys? Or do you love me more than they love me?
Yeah, I think it's the second. So,
Or was he pointing to the fish? I mean, Peter was a fisherman, right? Do you love me more than this fishing?
yeah, that's a very interesting thought as we see about that whole transition of what's going on.
So Peter was, he was one of the closest to Jesus, it seems, for the Gospels, and he denied that Jesus was cursed, the person asking him, and went out and wept bitterly, and was dramatically affected by that whole experience. And it's Jesus bringing him back, saying, "You're still in my fold."
Yeah, that's always been how I've understood the passages. The key is that 3 denials, 3 reinstatements, right? So Jesus gives him and this is obvious, but Jesus gives him an opportunity to come back from the 3 denials, and it's a beautiful moment, the symmetry of it. And I've always, with respect to everyone who said otherwise, heard that the phileo agape thing is like a little bit of Greek is a dangerous thing, and it's maybe not as significant as other things, but I really love the idea of Jesus saying, I know you might need me to help you, forget what you did and put it behind you.
So did Peter answer agape on the 3rd time?
No, he
stuck with
all 3
phileo
are
the whole-
phileo. Yes.
Ooh, wow. I didn't
Yeah.
realize.
So it's, yeah, whether or not it's important that Jesus asked him to go agape twice, and then the phileos, all of the responses, it's just a strange,
Mhm.
I mean, it may not mean a whole lot, but it's definitely something that's there.
Was it common in their culture though to agape your friends or your mentors or whatever? Or I mean, was that kind of reserved for parents and their children and children and their parents? You know, like that was the only people who really did agape
Do you want me to
prior to
do you want me to
Jesus.
tell you the truth, or do you want me to tell you just what I wanted to tell you?
Tell us the truth.
You don't want to tell us?
Let's start with the truth and go from there.
We can cut it out before that goes live. But so the interesting I think about agape is that it is almost non-existent prior to the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't see it in classical Greek, you don't see it anywhere else. The Koine Greek is pretty much where it starts at, which is the Greek that Jesus and them are using in writing. So that's where it gets a bit odd. So it's something that from that point on we see it. So I mean it's in Greek culture today, so they use it still today, all three of them, or four of them actually, if you want to throw Eros in there too. But so it's the other Greek words for love all existed in classical Greek. So there's 4 words, I think, 4 or 5, I don't know. So 4 of them at least that I can think of. But agape is not in classical Greek. So like Socrates was not using the word agape.
Why don't you like that answer though?
Because it doesn't, you would think, oh, the parents are always using that, but it's not. So most likely the parents are probably using the phileo as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that it may be Jesus more of bringing this in, this different kind of love, but there has to be something that they know about it. Because I mean, it'd be just like him saying some crazy word. If I were to come up with supercalifragilisticexpialidocious love, and use it that way, and it's like, that's sort of strange.
Well, was Jesus
But
asking
it's-
something new though? Is that's
it's-
kind of my point?
that's-
Like culturally, it was a little strange. Do you love me so much that like you care that much
Yeah.
about me? Not just that like, oh, we feel tight, you know, but like,
So you'd have to assume that they knew what he was talking about.
oh yeah.
Because you would also assume that he would have to have explained it at some point in time. What he's meaning
Wouldn't
by
have
it.
been
But we
natural
don't.
for him.
But we don't have it written
Like-
down. So the assumption is he didn't have to explain what agape was. But at what point did agape come into existence? Is sort of a. But yeah, so that's definitely one of those things that it's a strange piece of it. I think of the agape that he uses there. But we see Paul using it a lot. So when Paul talks about the love in 1 Corinthians, that is agape that he's using there to explain what it means. But we don't have that
But that all
explanation.
comes after
After
Jesus came and
Uses
started
it a lot.
spreading this love gospel.
Yes, correct.
Whatever, you know, the agape phileo, it meant something to Peter. It affected Peter emotionally that he asked him 3 times and he got it. So it doesn't really matter if we understand it. Peter got it.
Yeah, because after that he does take a different
Sorry,
role. So he does start to take a role that is a leader role in the 12 and in the group, we assume. We see it in Acts 2 that he does at that point. We don't, in Acts 1 I didn't think about through it, if there's anything in that. But at least in Acts 2 we see Peter taking that role of leadership. He's pushed as that spokesman to a point, whether or not he wants to be that or not. They're like, hey, just get up and do it. And so things do change with Peter, and he does we assume he does quit fishing at this point. They lock themselves in a room at least to go pray for a while after Jesus leaves. But we know there's a lot more teaching that goes on that we don't see between the time of Jesus' resurrection and the time of his ascension, which is strange because you would assume that they would have recorded it somewhere. Maybe Matthew wasn't in the room, I guess, and writing it down. I don't know. So it's Brett.
Think of what Betty mentioned a few weeks back, the difference between love being a feeling and a commitment, where you know, you're married, and there's like the honeymoon period, and there's these feelings, you're Twitter-pated, you're smitten, and of course I love you, and so, you know, Christ.
Down to the people that are the martyrs of Jesus, which we see throughout Acts. So, the last question, as we start running out of time, we wanted to throw out this. This is the question that they put in the book, and it says, Martin suggests, if you want to grasp what Christian life entails, repeat often these 3 questions and hold them close. What are you looking for? What do you want me to do for you? And do you love me? How might you hold these close? How might your friendship with Jesus be different 5 years from now if you indeed hold them close? So these are the 3 questions that we have recorded 3 times in Scripture. So it's very interesting. All the other questions are usually just once, but these are the 3. That was just the point. How can you hold them? What would make it different?
Well, I just want to thank you guys for this class. It's been a very good class.
Very much so.
Yeah, these 3 questions are ones that really drive to the point of the whole book. So if you remember the invitation that we started out with, and Jeff's sermon even probably a couple of so we started the class, and it was probably about 2 months before that, and that was what he focused on, I think, at least in my mind. And that's what drove Karl to pushing us to read the book together, and then we're like, this needs to be more than just the 3 of us, and everybody that heard the sermon forgot about it, and so but it's one of those things that, what are you looking for, is just that thing that just drives you all day long, because usually you're looking for your keys, you're looking for this, looking for that all around the house, and you don't remember where they're at, but in reality,
Call my phone. Can you call
we sort of just live with Jesus and don't look for him. And that's what I think about a lot of times growing up in the church. I just transitioned from one position to the other because I just never had that sinful life that lots of people have. And if you think about that, what are you looking for? I'm not looking for anything. I already found it. But that's not, the people that he's asking these questions to are people that have already found him too. At what point is it that we need to continue to ask that question, I think, which then drives to the next one, what do you want me to do for you? And so a very interesting question that Jesus asked us. And that's that prayer connection that I think that we tend to ask for things that are just make this person feel better, fix this problem, and we just are stuck with problems and not ever thinking sometimes on these internal things when we're praying. Help me to love better. And depending on how your prayer life is, I know my prayer life is not the best, and so those are things I don't usually ask for. Somebody's sick, some problem out in the world, those are my asks. But I think, what do you want me to do for you is one of those things. And then, do you love me is, I think, the hard one. Because we know that the actions that we have to take when we get to that end are different than what we tend to take. And so, at least in my mind, that's what I got out of the question. Any other thoughts on this question?
I think the second one is the harder one. It's more than just, oh, please heal this person. But if you've got something that you're missing, and, you have to do a lot of deep soul searching as to, I am really struggling here. Why am I struggling? To figure out what I really need Jesus to do for me.
Yeah, it makes me think of the Alcoholics Anonymous program. That first step, you're usually in denial, and the first step is realizing what you need. And once you've realized that, then you can start working towards the solution to that. But until you realize it, then you don't, and that's, I think, a lot of times the hard piece for our own lives, that we don't know what we're missing, and so we can't make progress to get to it. We just know things aren't good. Or not happy.
I guess one thing that stands out to me is in Peter's restoral, there is no trial period, there is no period of mourning. It's feed my sheep, it's respond. Go, you're my guy.
Yeah, it's time.
Yeah.
So our last slide is just all of the questions together. You just threw them all up there, and it's one of those things that as we close out to a point for today, you'll see that we have what, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's
14.
14 plus there's some that are doubles. So that's 14 of the 307 that we'll see next week, or that you'll get the handout on. And it's just one of those things that just how much of an impact these 14 can have on you. And so then, if you take all of them together, it's just crazy, I think, just the amount of teaching or the amount of impact it can have on anybody's life by just asking questions. So it's very interesting, I think, the way that he taught using questions so much. Karl, Jeff, any other thoughts? So next week we'll be back in here, and we'll have handouts and stuff like that. So lots of questions, and you'll have a test on them. You'll have to get all the answers. So thank you guys for being here today and for being in the class.
Have you made Christmas cookies this year?